Hello and welcome to Politics and Bourbon. We're here to discuss current politics, current bills, current government initiatives, and to break them down and explain them for the normal, everyday American. Politics and Bourbon, like I said, so got our bourbon, let's get into the politics. So, today we're going to be discussing Trump's big, beautiful bill. And yes, that is the actual congressional title for the bill. Don't agree with it. Sounds like a silly bill name, but there have been far sillier in the past. So, we're going to go through what the bill does, the highlights of it, how much it's going to cost, how much debt it's going to create. It will create debt, there's no doubt about that. But almost all government programs do. There's been no party, Democrat or Republican, that has substantially reduced the overall federal deficit in decades. So, to start out with what the bill does, the first thing it does is extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts and make them permanent. Some of these cuts were personal cuts aimed at the middle and working classes, but they do keep the corporate tax rate at 21% from the pre-2017 high of 35%. Now, why is this important? It's important because the OECD average, which is the Organization of Developed Countries, essentially, including all of our European allies that are high income, they have an average corporate tax rate of 21.1%. Our tax rate being at 35% made it one of the highest in the world, in the developed world. The thing is that the big players, the things people always complain about, how Microsoft and Amazon and stuff, how they pay 3 or 4% corporate income tax. That nothing is going to change. Not until Congress incorporates a minimum corporate tax, which they're never going to do, and they'd have to make it a minimum global corporate tax, which is even harder to do. The 35% and the 21%, they hit mostly small and medium-sized businesses, a lot of family-run businesses, a lot of farm businesses that are the backbone of this nation. They're the ones that end up paying the full percentage. So if Congress wants to get off their asses and pass a bill to make Amazon pay its fair share, hey, I'm all for that. But we had to bring the corporate tax down to help the businesses that are the backbone of America. Those small and medium businesses, those farming businesses that are of medium and even large size, we had to do it for that reason. The second thing, you have to excuse me, I had to make notes on this. It's a 937-page bill. Actually, more than that now. But I read the entire bill, so you don't have to. The next thing is the SALT, which is the state and local tax deduction, was raised from $10,000 to $40,000. This benefits taxpayers almost exclusively in high-tax blue states. I disagree with this immensely, because it allows California and New York to continue raising state taxes with little backlash from their populations, because they get to take the taxes they pay the state off their federal taxes, even though the taxes in the state are going to programs that are only going to be used in the state for the most part, and the federal taxes are paying for services for the country. Now, there are arguments that there's a lot of red states, a lot of working class states that get back more from Washington than they send in every year, and that is true. That is true. But California and New York have progressively gotten closer and closer and closer to a dollar in, dollar out versus what they used to be. California used to put in $1 and get 60 cents back. Now you've got some red states, particularly the ones that are expanding fast, like Texas, very nearly becoming donor states. So, do I like it? No. Do I understand it in order to get the votes? Yes. I do feel that it does allow blue states to essentially allow their Democrat politicians to continue profligate programs in their states. The next thing is the child tax credit. It's going from $2,000 to $2,200 a year. Not a huge change. It'll be a slight benefit to families with children. The next part is immediate expensing. That means you get to take the deduction in the year that you buy it, or the year that you make the investment, for businesses, capital equipment, and research. This benefits capital-intensive businesses, particularly manufacturing. So the goal is to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. In order to get to that goal, We need to make it as easy as possible to open a factory. Being able to write off a chunk of your capital equipment that you have to buy to create a factory, and I've created a couple in my life, that will be incredibly beneficial to restoring manufacturing in America. Now, are we ever going to get back low dollar items like rubber duckies? Probably not. But we've got a real chance to restore the high value chain items to American shores in terms of their manufacture. Middle class and working class households that aren't on government programs will see a reduction in their taxes of between $500 and $1,500 a year with this bill, which not a huge amount, but meaningful. That's Christmas presents, that's a vacation, it's meaningful. Medicaid will now have work requirements of 20 hours a week. Now, the average working American puts in over 50. So 20 hours a week to get Medicaid is not unreasonable. It's not new. Work requirements have come and gone and come again since the Clinton administration in the 1990s. This is reasonable, and it doesn't affect parents with children under the age of 14. It's understood that under the age of 14, childcare becomes an issue, so you can't necessarily work even part-time. But for able-bodied adults, working part-time in order to get Medicaid is a reasonable ask. Medicaid and SNAP, which is food stamps, will be severely limited for non-citizens. To me, this is just common sense. The next one is clean energy tax credits and subsidies are mostly rolled back or eliminated. Look, I have no problem with giving clean energy the same tax credits that we give oil and gas. Oil and gas do get tax credits. I worked in the oil and gas industry, one of many industries that I worked in. But the point is that you do get tax benefits for drilling for oil, for drilling for gas. If you want to extend those same things to clean energy, I have no problem with it. I have a problem with subsidies because that's the government picking winners and losers. And that shouldn't happen. Businesses should either be able to survive on their own or die. You shouldn't subsidize businesses that cannot turn a profit in the free market. $350 billion will be allocated for the border and national security, which includes 10,000 more border agents, 100,000 detention beds for illegals, and border wall construction to be restarted in necessary areas. There are areas of the border that a wall is more effective than stationing personnel there, because a lot of these areas are way out in the middle of nowhere. There's no real services out there for Border Patrol and their families and everything else. Places like that where you have a relatively low level of crossing, a border wall just makes sense. It provides a barrier and filters people around into areas where Border Patrol can more easily stop them. $150 billion of this bill goes to the military for more ships, increased jet and bomber production, particularly increasing the B-21 production, increasing the Arleigh Burke class destroyer production, San Antonio class, and several other classes of ship and subs, adding ships to the order list. I think no one can argue that our Navy has shrunk to one of its smallest levels since before World War II. And if we do have to fight China in an upcoming war, we're going to need those ships. And we're going to need more of them, quite a few more of them, as a matter of fact. While $1 trillion defense budget, which is what this will lead into, does sound like a lot, I would remind you that we are in the most dangerous global period since the Cold War. The globe right now is more dangerous to America and its allies than at any point since the Cold War. You've got the first land war in Europe since World War II. You've got the Communist Party in China licking its chops over Taiwan. You've got a crisis in the Middle East, so it is the most dangerous period since the Cold War. And if you adjusted what we spent on average during the Cold War, and you adjusted that, took the same percentage of GDP spent on defense, and took that percentage and used modern GDP, current GDP, our defense budget would be over $2 trillion a year. But that's what it took. Now, am I saying the defense budget has to go to $2 trillion a year? No. We have better weapons that can do more with less, but a $1 trillion defense budget for a world that is as dangerous as it was in the Cold War is not an insane ask. The final thing is that there will be pilot programs, well, one in particular, and that is giving babies born between 2025 and 2028 $1,000 into an investment account when they're born. This is much like the Scandinavian baby bonus baby box, which in a lot of Scandinavian countries you can choose to either get money or a box full of diapers and baby toys and baby clothes and stuff like that for each new child. It's actually a Trump initiative that is unusually Scandinavian. And before I get any comments, the Scandinavians are not socialists. If you tell any Scandinavian that they are a socialist, they will get quite mad at you. They were socialist at one time. They have made the transition to market capitalism quite a while ago, actually. So, no, the Scandinavians are not full-on socialists, but they do things that we don't do here. So, it's not a bad pilot program. I think it could work, but we'll see. And that's really the key features of the bill. I would like to point out that this is going to add $3.4 trillion to the deficit. Or not to the deficit, I should say, to the debt over the next 10 years, according to the CBO estimate. Now, the CBO usually overshoots the mark on their estimates, but it is important to note that the CBO also bases their projections on 1.8% growth for the final 8 years of any 10-year projection that they make. 1.8% is actually below the average for America, and definitely below the average for when you have high-growth Republican leadership in office. For every 1% extra that the GDP grows, it's about $230 billion. So, we're talking about 14% of GDP for the 3.4 trillion, 1% extra a year, which means growing at 2.8 versus 1.8% a year, cuts that $3.4 trillion in additional debt down to 1 trillion. You tack on a percentage or two and a couple of good years after that, and you could get this down to $400-500 billion total added to the debt over 10 years. That's really relatively low cost and a relatively reasonable expectation. Democrats try to scare you by saying, "Oh, it's going to, add Democrats love using deficit and debt interchangeably. It's going to add $3.4 trillion to the deficit. No, it's going to add $3.4 trillion to the debt, and that's going to be over a 10-year period." Democrats in particular love explaining that, and Democrats always love pushing for, "Oh, we can't afford this," when the Republicans are in office. And Republicans always go, "We can't afford this," when the Democrats are in office. This has been going on in American politics literally since the early 20th century. This is a standard refrain from both parties. Don't let either party scare you, regardless of who's in office. So, I would also like to point out that in Biden's term, just to show that there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans on this issue, in Biden's term, his bills added $3.44 trillion to the debt over the 10 years running from 2020 to 2030, and his executive actions added a further $1.24 billion. So, to be fair, Trump's got a wide way to go before he even gets to Biden's numbers. And before anybody says that, "Oh, that was COVID," yeah, sorry, most of the COVID spending was done under Trump's first term, with Operation Warp Speed and a lot of other Paycheck Protection Act. We had to spend a lot during COVID, but most of that spending happened under Trump's term. That's why he will unfortunately go down in history in his first term as one of the presidents that put us most into debt. But it was a once-in-a-century pandemic. Hopefully it doesn't happen for another century. So that's really, I would also like to point out that, if you remember, CBO takes into account a 1.8% growth rate in their budget forecasts. We're already sitting at, as of July 3rd, according to the Atlanta Fed, on July 3rd, we're already sitting at a 2.6% growth rate for this year, and that's expected to go up, not down. So, you have a high growth Republican in office, and you can make it back, because remember that when it comes to the national debt, it's not the dollar amount of the debt that counts. It's the percentage of debt to GDP that counts. If you can keep the percentage of debt to GDP relatively slow in growing, you can afford to spend a lot more money. That's what happened under Reagan. Reagan ran large fiscal deficits, but the debt to GDP didn't go up all that much because he had high growth rates. So it's important to remember when they talk about debts and deficit, the $36 trillion debt's a scary number, I know. But what really matters is the federal debt to GDP percentage. That's all you're graded on. You're not graded on the dollar amount. So, that was Politics and Bourbon's coverage of the Big Beautiful Bill. As always, we're always happy to have you listen, and we're always happy to share a drink with you. And so have a wonderful night, a wonderful day, depending on when you're watching this. And hopefully you got something out of this. We'll be back with more stories and more explanations on politics twice a week, every week. Remember to subscribe. It's a little bell in the corner. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful time.